tonight's Save Our Seas Distinguished Speaker Series. We're going to be getting started in a few minutes, so stay tuned. We have a great speaker tonight coming to talk to us all about kelp and the sharks and the other inhabitants that are there. So we'll get started in about 4 minutes. Thanks for joining tonight.
There are legends of the deep. Ancient and elusive, they are the keepers of balance in our oceans. Hammer. Angel. Great white. Tiger. Manta. Refined over millions of years, their powers are unique. They are super sharks. Together, they ensure the stability of our world's life support. The oceans. Our oceans need super sharks. We need them, and they need our help. Assemble the super sharks and help them save our seas.
I used to actually be terrified in any water where I couldn't see the bottom. Tales of monsters lurking in the deep. What are these enigmatic, crazy creatures? The first recognizable ancestors of sharks existed before trees, whereas now they could be facing collapse in a single generation. I actually think it's very hard to know just how much you love something until you lose it. Grief is the price we pay for love. The thing that drove me on this path was a pure passion for the animals themselves. I didn't start out wanting to save them because I didn't know that they needed saving or help. I realized that if we want to help save sharks, we need to make sure they have safe places to live in.
Well, officially welcome everyone to our tonight's Save Our Seas Foundation Distinguished Speaker Series. We're so happy to have you. Tonight we have a great speaker, Dr. Emiliano García-Rodríguez, will be talking to us from Baja California, all about kelp forests and the great, amazing animals that inhabit those forests and their importance to us around the world. Not just on the west coast of the United States, right? So tonight, though, before we get started, my name is Lance. I'm the Director of Environmental Sustainability here at the Museum of Discovery and Science in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. If you ever find yourself in the area, you are more than welcome to come join us. Here's our beautiful museum. Here at the museum, our main mission is to connect people to inspiring science. And we do that through four different ways, through physical science education, early childhood education, health and wellness education. And tonight is environmental sustainability. So tonight we're really highlighting learning about the environment, becoming environmental stewards, and introducing you to real scientists that are out there doing the work. We would like to thank the Save Our Seas Foundation, who this year is celebrating their 20th anniversary of funding amazing research, conservation, education, and about sharks and rays. Thank you very much for their support in supporting this series and the amazing work they do all around the world. Tonight, like I said, we're joined by Dr. Emiliano Garcia. He will be talking to us all about kelp. Emiliano grew up in Veracruz, a coastal city in tropical southeast Mexico. As a child, he looked for any excuse to go to the beach to see what the local fishers had brought in from the sea. It was there that Emiliano discovered sharks and rays, and from that moment, he knew what he wanted to study, that he knew he wanted to study these species. That became his motivation to pursue a degree in marine biology. After he graduated, Emiliano moved to northwestern Mexico to study for his master's degree and worked with blue sharks, fishers in the region. While studying for his doctorate, Emiliano developed a project that focused on understanding the movements and trophic ecology of juvenile white sharks in a nursery area, as well as their interactions with fishers. For the past 13 years, Emiliano has been involved in projects on the ecology of elasmobranchs, sharks and rays, and related fisheries all over Mexico. During this time, Emiliano has become aware of the lack of scientific data that are needed to understand the status of these species and to develop well-informed management and conservation strategies. That is why now Dr. Emiliano Garcia-Rodríguez is committed to producing information that fills the knowledge gap for this group and this critical species. So, Dr. Emiliano Garcia, thank you very much for coming and joining us.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the Museum of Discovery and Science, and of course, Save Our Seas for this opportunity to talk to you about this project we've been doing with kelp.
Yeah, great. We're happy to have you. Just a few little housekeeping things for this evening. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. Emiliano has a great presentation he's going to be giving to us, but if you have any questions throughout, go ahead and type them in. Don't wait to the end. If you have a burning question, go ahead and ask it. We want this to be more of a conversation as we go forward. There will be some dedicated Q&A time at the very end, but you can ask a question at any time. All right. Thank you. And again, go ahead, throw it over to you, and you can share your screen, Emiliano, and go on.
Okay, thanks again. So I'm gonna talk to you about how kelp forests are being used by sharks and what we've learned through this project. So why kelp forests are important? So these are one of the most productive and biodiverse ecosystems around the world. It hosts a large array of marine species. But these kelp forests are formed by macroalgae, brown macroalgae, that are really large, that has a canopy on the top and construct what it's analogous to the terrestrial forest that we can see in a lot of places, but on the sea. And these kelp forests form a very complex habitats that are used for a large array of marine species, fishes, of course, elasmobranch, sharks and rays, and others. And these ecologically are very important because are the basis of complex food webs, are the primary producers in the habitats and the ecosystems where they live. And from there, a lot of other trophic levels start to take part into the ecosystem dynamics. And to us human, of course, it provides a lot of ecosystem service that we'll talk a little bit later about it. So where are kelp forests around the world? We have them in a lot of places. There are a lot of species of kelp. We have like 103 species around the world. We can see those are mainly found on temperate waters around the world, but they can also be on polar waters and subtropical areas. Kelp forests dominate rock reefs in coastal areas where they habitat, and they are mostly at surface waters between less than 50 meters. And due to their nature, they prefer to be on cool waters, less than 16 degrees Celsius, 60 Fahrenheit. And then you can start thinking how these type of habitats could face the global changes that we're living right now. But what do the kelp forests give to us as humans? It gives us a lot of services. From the ecological point of view, those are part of food webs, so are the basis, so more complex trophic levels start feeding. But also when kelp forests die, form part of other nutrient cycles, where some detritivores like abalones and a lot of oysters can feed on them and start producing more food for other trophic levels. And they also can be directly eaten by grazers like sea urchins or like other herbivore species, fishes. But kelp forests also give us protection from coastal damage from waves. They're a natural barrier that make us life more easy on the coast without these rough waves that we have in some places. And they are also very important for carbon sequestration, that in the world that we're living now, it's really important because they can absorb more carbon than any forest on the earth that we have. And due to the complex habitat that they form, those are really important habitats that a lot of marine species use as their houses and also for their nurseries. And specifically to humans, this, besides their ecological importance, those are beautiful ecosystems that we like to be on them. So we use it for recreational activities like diving, snorkeling, paddling, kayaking, and a lot of people do recreational fisheries on them. So if people are doing recreational fisheries on kelp forests, that means that we have also commercial fisheries that in some coastal areas, like the one that I live, could be really important for coastal communities that doesn't have access to any other type of economic activities in some cases. But as amazing as they are facing many threats currently. So those are very vulnerable to changes in sea temperatures. So the climate change and the global warming events that we're facing now could decimate this type of habitats. And a lot of kelp coverage have been lost around the world. There's an estimation that kelp forests are declining 2,000% per year, but in some places this is more dramatic, and there are places where the kelp coverage have been lost in a 40% range. And the kelp forests that are found in more near to the tropics are more susceptible than the ones that are in cooler waters. Another threat that they are facing is that due to fisheries, mostly, there's a loss of marine predators by overfishing. And we have this example of how sea otters in California have been decimated a lot of years ago. And sea otters primarily feed on sea urchins. So when the sea otters are gone, then sea urchins start feeding on kelp forests and start to decrease the coverage of these species. And we have a lot of invasive species that are getting due to the tropicalization, due to the effect of climate change. And we now are seeing a lot of sargassum species that are taking the places that kelps used to habitat. So the place where I live, where I work, is the Northeastern Pacific. So we have kelps in some areas in the Gulf of Alaska, but the majority of the coverage is from northern US to the Baja California Peninsula in Mexico. These are really coastal, and the main species that form this kelp forest is this one giant kelp that is called Macrocystis pyrifera, that is very large. It's the largest of kelp species. And you can see that we start seeing a pattern here of what happened with kelp forests in Mexico, because when we see in central Baja California, northern Baja California, how many of these kelp forests are protected, we can see that almost nothing of those are protected compared with Southern California and Central California. And we see that even if we have a good coverage of kelp, it's smaller than we have in Central California. So that's why these habitats are very vulnerable and why we are studying them, what's happening with them.
But can I ask a question about that?
Yeah,
Is that
for
so
sure.
the graph is showing just the kelp forests that are protected, right? So Central California, Southern California has more that are protected than Baja. Is that a factor of the government? What do you know why? why are there less protections in the southern region for them?
California has one of the most complex system of marine protected areas. So they are very good at protecting critical habitats like these kelp forests. These are very important for coastal communities and recreational activities in California. So that's why they are protecting. In Mexico, you will see that these are very important fishing grounds. So how we are protecting areas in Mexico is different. So that's why these areas are not protected.
That's interesting. I wonder, because you have a lot of species that are large species, and I'm sure they migrate up and down the coast, right? So
exactly.
So they might be protected in one area and then not in another area, and that's interesting that there isn't more alignment, I guess. Maybe there's a want for alignment, maybe, but that's a whole separate question, I guess, right?
Yeah. And actually I'm part of some initiatives that are working for have these transboundary protected areas that are managed transboundary, because animals don't care about boundaries.
Right. Yeah. They swim everywhere. Right. That's interesting. All right, cool. Thank you for that clarification.
So that's our kelp forest, but we are here for sharks mainly. So how sharks are using this kelp forest? So there are a lot of places in South Africa, in northwestern US that we pretty well know what sharks are doing there. There are some species that are resident, like this pajama shark, like these 7 gills in Seattle and some areas in southern Canada that lives there a lot of their time. The leopard shark on Southern California. And there are some species that are visitors, temporal visitors, like white sharks, that enter into kelp forests to predate on seals. But for some smaller species, these are important reproductive areas. Like for some cat sharks, these are habitats where they lay their eggs. You can see that here are the eggs. So they're camouflaged pretty well in this kelp forest. So they are protected from predators and from environmental changes. And we know a lot of sharks, but what about the rays? We know very little of how rays are used in these areas. You all know that sharks, ray, and chimeras are species that are really threatened, are very vulnerable to overfishing due to their life history traits. They take a lot of time to mature, have very few descendants. So that's why they are very vulnerable. And we know more about sharks than we know about rays. And when I was thinking about what was next on my life of trying to know a lot more about these species, I thought that white sharks in Mexico are using coastal areas, but not kelp forests. They are using a specific nurseries in southern Baja California. We don't have 7 gills associated to kelp forests. It's really rare to see a leopard shark in Mexico anymore. And there are no species egg laying as far as we know. So even if we know some very well about sharks in other kelp forests, we don't know many about Mexico. Talking about with friends that have a lot more time working on kelp forests, they rarely see a shark or even a ray. So that's what triggers this project. So how sharks and ray are used in these kelp forests in Baja California, Mexico. And we are working on this area in northwestern Mexico, like 2 or 3 hours from the border with the US. It's called San Quintin Bay in the Baja California Peninsula. We have a lot of habitats in there, and of course, kelp forests. And we have this main island that is where most of this green area, that is the kelp coverage, still persists. Historically, these were places where kelp forests were, but they are not anymore there. We only have kelp forests around this small island. And this is a very interesting place since the social point of view. There are a lot of fisheries going on in there that are doing their activities in kelp forests. Sea urchin fisheries, lobster fisheries, they are directly exploiting kelp forests to get some specific compounds. And there are a lot of sport fisheries and fisheries for bony fishes. So this is a pretty dynamic area with a lot of economic activities going on there that depend on kelp forests. So that's why it's really important to keep these habitats safe. So what did we do to understand how sharks use this area? So we start with this monitoring using this station that have some bait on the front and a camera. So we set them and see what's going on in these places. We monitored fisheries, mostly artisanal fisheries that are the one occurring in the area. And we did some trophic analysis to understand what sharks and rays found in this area are eating, and if they are eating on kelp forests. So first, I will talk to you a little bit about this baited remote underwater video station, BROVs. Maybe you have heard about them. It's a pretty cool methodology to understand how the sharks use these areas. And they have some pretty advantages over traditional monitorings like diving. So when we dive, we have some time limit before we have to go up to the surface. There are a limit of the depths where we can stay a considerable amount of time. And it's very tight. When you have a lot of divings in there, it could be pretty cool, but you get very tired. So these cameras, these stations provide these advantages. So we just put a little bit of chopped bait in there, some sardine. We set the station between 60 and 90 minutes, and we put it at depth between 5 and 30 meters. We put 5 of these stations in a site to understand the large, how things are different among a single site. And we put this station on kelp forest inside the bay that I showed you previously, but I'm going to show you again later, and in standard rocket habitats outside the bay to compare how the species varied between habitats. If they were the same, they were different, and where most of these shark species were. So this is the place where we put it inside the bay. So this is a very shallow area. This outside bay that gets a lot of wave action in there, and of course, the island where the kelp coverage is. So what have we seen in here? So I'm going to show you a little videos of when we deploy this station, and you will see a pretty cool photography or video of how we enter into this kelp forest. So these are really amazing habitats. And since touching the bottom, sea bottom, some species are already there. You can start to see these amazing and colorful fishes. These are very biodiversity areas, have a lot of species, colorful, a lot of rocky areas associated. You can see the kelp forest in here and a lot of small fishes, white fishes, garibaldis that are endemic fishes from the area. just getting into the bait and trying to eat it. Some doesn't care about the bait and just they're passing by. You can see that conditions here are pretty rough. There's a lot of waves. Some are really easy to identify because they're passed very close to the camera, so it's easy to see all the characteristics that you need to see. Some others, without the water is really turbid that you cannot see very much. There are ones that are pretty easily to identify without seeing the details, like this moray, that even if the water tries to take it away from the station, it tries to get in again. To eat
Oh, that was a moray eel attached to it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. It looked like it's another piece of kelp.
Yeah. And you can see very large animal like this Hollywood that just passes and is huge. And just passing by because it doesn't care about the bait. And you can see that sometimes the amount of video that you can see is very small because it's covered by all these kelps. And you can see here some of these invasive species, these sargassums that are taking over the kelp forest in some of the areas. So they are mixing.
Is that the same sargassum that washes up on the beach here in Fort Lauderdale on the East Coast?
It's a different
similar?
species, but it's really similar. But yeah, you have all that problem in the Gulf of Mexico, in the eastern coast of the US, that a lot of sargassum is getting there. So we're not in that place yet, but a lot of species are getting in here. These are more tropical species of sargassum, so now the water is more hot, they start to getting in there and living there.
So that's a climate change story right there.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, even if we are focused on fishes and sharks and rays, there are always some visitors that just get in to play a little bit. Sometimes they start to wanting to take out the bait, and then they doesn't care about the bait and they just focus on the camera and playing with them. Maybe some of the flashing that came from the camera housings is what attracts them. But what have we found? So you can see in this graph that it's very clear. In the kelp habitats, we have a lot of species compared to what we have in rocky and sandy habitats inside and outside the bay. We have almost double of the species we found in the other places. So even if some of these habitats are really vulnerable and are not getting really well with these changes, they still persist. These are still important and still are hosting a lot of these marine species. And when we see by season, we can see that almost all seasons, the kelp forests have a larger number of species. But this is really clear when we see at the abundance, at the number of individuals per species, we can see that it's really clear. Kelp forests are the ones that are the most biodiverse habitats. And regarding sharks and rays, we have seen very few of them, but still we have seen a lot of cool species, mostly rays. So you can see here abundant guitarfish passing through. This is a data deficient species according to the IUCN red list. So that means that we know almost nothing about this species. So whatever information we get, it's really important to understand how vulnerable they are to extracting activities. And even if you cannot see the kelp forest in here, this is a place that it's really close.
Looks like we lost Emiliano for a second. Emiliano, are you there? All right, Emiliano, back. Thank you for sitting tight with us.
Thank you, Lance. So I was talking to you about these shovelnose guitarfish that are on the area. And we have also these bat rays. This is one of these species that doesn't care about the bay. They're just passing by. These are amazing. I will talk to you about a little bit later about how many of these species are fish and how many are not. This is a least concerned species, so it seems like it's doing relatively well around the world. We have these, and maybe you won't see that much because the visibility is not that good in this video, but we can definitely identify these species. It's very characteristic because it has an array of 3 lines of thorns. So it's really easy to identify it even if we don't see that many details. You can see in here, all these algae are invasive species also, so are taking a lot of other habitats. And we can see a diamond stingray, almost looking like flying around. So these are the species that we've seen on these broths. We haven't seen any shark yet, and that's something that we expect a little bit because other people, other scientists that have been working on kelp for a long time haven't seen them. So we only go to that places like 1 time, 2 times per month, but fishers are living there all the time. And fisheries are really important in Mexico. Mexico is the 3rd largest producer of sharks worldwide. We caught a lot of sharks and rays. We eat a lot of sharks and rays, even if people don't know about it, but we are eating them. So those are pretty important for the food security of the country. And around 7,000 tons of sharks and rays were landed in 2018. So we caught a lot. In the area in San Quintin, shark fisheries stopped due to weather conditions for the last year that weren't very good. There are other species that are more valuable to fishermen, so they prefer to target those. And for some social issues, some security problems are on the place. That also gave us a lot of issues to us doing this project. So for sharks, this is good. They are not cutting them, targeted. But for us, it became a little difficult to get some data. So what we learned is that currently in the San Quintin Bay Area, most of the elasmobranch are caught as bycatch in gill nets. You can see this is an example of the type of boats that fishermen use in Mexico. Those are really small boats. They have their gill nets or their traps in there, and they don't go too much far from the coast. But they told us that they make some of the catches of elasmobranch in areas near kelp forests. So again, it seems like elasmobranchs are really used in these areas. It's just that we don't see them many much. And why is that? It's maybe because of their habitat. Some of them are more nocturnal predators. So when we set this station on the day, we see very few of them. So in general, these are the species that are caught by artisanal fisheries in the area for the last 3 years. You can see 2020 that not many species were landed. We were still on pandemic, so a lot of activities stopped. But we can see that most of the species that are being caught in the area are these bony fishes, like this ocean whitefish, this barrel sandbar, these halibuts. And all these species are associated to kelp forest. The California sheephead almost lives exclusively there. Also the rockfishes and the sand basses. So these kelp forests are the main areas where fishermen are doing their activities. Most of these sharks fisheries stop, so we don't see them landed in here. Well, they are still caught them as incidental catches. And these are the species that are caught, like banded guitarfish is caught in the summer and late winter and early spring. These are resident species that seems to be all the year in there. We have seen them almost in all the videos that we reviewed. We have also the diamond stingray. This is a vulnerable species. So, but fishermen caught them very few individuals of the year. Also, the bat rays are not very important for fisheries. But we have a species that they caught more in here and in other places, like the shovel-nosed guitarfish, Protobatus productus, that these are near-threatened species according to the IUCN, that is caught regularly in the summer and again, winter and spring. But this is the most caught ray and shark species in Mexican Pacific. We can see that in 2018, we landed almost 3,500 tons of these guitarfish. So this is the species that is sustaining ray fisheries in Mexico.
And that's just only the ones that have reported, right? I'm sure that there's others.
Yeah, there are some others that
right?
are not reported or are not reported by species name, because that's an issue we have in Mexico. Most of landings are not reported as a species level, but only as rays, as sharks. So what we're doing with some colleagues is try to reconstruct these catches to estimate how many of each species is being caught. So we have a species that was part of the species that triggered this study, that was the horn shark. Fishers in there say that they caught in very few of these individuals, but in some other places, like in this area, the mid-Baja California Peninsula, this is the third most landed species. In some seasons, this species, when there are no other things to catch, they start to targeting these sharks. Even if they don't have a lot of meat that they can sell, it's the only thing available. There are other species that are not, seems to not be all the time in there, that are resident just in some seasons, like Pacific angel shark, that is most associated to sandy bottoms and muddy bottoms, like this spiny dogfish. And the Pacific angel shark is really interesting because it's also one of the most important species of shark fisheries in Mexico. We can see here like the Mexican Pacific coast is a place where most of these individuals are being caught. So this is a very important species for fisheries. And we have some visitors, some that we didn't see on the videos, but fishermen are telling us that they are seeing them, even in kelp forests, like common treasure, the top shark, blue shark, shortfin mako, that it seems like they are getting there to feed momentarily and they leave. And we have some species that are also in there, like the white sharks, and they have told us that maybe once a year they can see or caught a leopard shark. White shark, as I mentioned, that's what I did for my PhD, understanding how sharks, juvenile sharks, move between California and Baja California. So they are using all these coastal areas. So we have seen that population are going up for white sharks. So they start occupying habitats that were previously not occupied by them. So maybe kelp forests are going to be one of those. And finally, the last part of this project that is still in progress is understanding what sharks and rays are eating them. Are they eating in kelp forests or in other places? So for this, we use this technique that is called stable isotope analysis. And basically, it's we are what we eat. The food that we eat, it's taking over all of tissues. So if we took a sample of our tissues, we can understand what we eat, what we ate, and where do we eat. So it allows us to estimate what the species eat without sacrificing, because we only need a little amount of tissue. So we don't have to sacrifice the sharks and rays like we previously needed to do this stomach content analysis. So we have different type of tissues like blood, liver, and muscle. And each one of those give us a different understanding of the time of the eating. So blood, it gets the diet they eat, the food, it's get very incorporated very quickly compared to muscle. So with that, we can start to see how the food starts to move into trophic webs. And we can identify what type of primary producers their prey were feeding on, if those are phytoplankton or kelp forests in this case. So what we did is that we took muscle samples from the two guitarfishes, for shovel-nosed and banded guitarfishes, and from some of their prey of the grazers, and of course the primary producers that are the kelp forests and the plankton. So now we are looking to getting the results. We already sent the samples, and we are waiting for see what amazing results we have, and to really understand if these species, like we hypothesize, they are feeding on kelp forests. So that would be all for me. Many thanks again for all support. I just want to say thanks to all my collaborators, these amazing people. Without them, I cannot do anything. And again, to the Museum of Discovery and Science and the Save Our Seas Foundation for funding this project, and to all of you for attending this talk. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. It sounds like such an amazing project. I want to know whose job is it to sit and watch all the, maybe it's hours of grub video,
Hundreds of
just
hours,
waiting for something to swim by.
You just grab your coffee, sit in front of the computer, and start looking things happening.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't see anything in 20 minutes, so it gets a little boring. But then you start seeing everything at the same time, and you have to just pause your video to write what you are seeing then. So yeah, we all do that.
Do you record and then watch it later, or do you do it live?
No, we record that. Okay. And then when we get back to the laboratory, to the office, we start to looking at those videos.
That could be really interesting to think about. I've heard of like citizen science projects where they have like, hundreds or thousands of hours of video to sift through, and they'll put it out to the internet and have citizen scientists go through and like watch and then tell them when something comes through. Kind of interesting. Have you ever used those bruvs like in the mid water column, or do they have to be at the bottom to really be effective?
We are doing both. We are doing surface and the demersal. That is most what I've shown you. In the surface, in the mid water, we don't have many more information, and it gets tangled sometimes in the kelp forest, so we prefer not to set them, but in the other places. So
yeah, because I would assume that would limit to the species you could see, right? Because how deep are these kelp forests? Can be really deep, hundreds of feet, right?
The most depth, the deeper areas that we put these bruvs was 3 meters, but most of them are between 15 and 5 meters, so it's not that deep.
Right. And then do you control for time of day? Do you put lights on them and put them out at night?
Yeah, for these ones, we haven't need to put lights on them, but in some other places that we are also working on, we definitely need to have lights, because at 3 meters, you don't see anything. Right.
Those are extra boring videos to watch, maybe. You can't see anything. Oh, that's really interesting. And the stable isotope project, so by taking tissue samples, you can see what the animal's eating, right? I get that right? And so that can give you a whole idea of an ecosystem, right? Like what are those keystone species that you need to really protect, because everything else is tied to it, right?
Exactly.
Through the trophic levels. And for those of you that remember trophic levels, it was in about 5th grade of middle school, maybe 6th grade of middle school science, when you talked about producers and primary consumers, secondary consumers, right? Tertiary consumers and top predators. So that's really cool. You can use that neat scientific technique to really inform and fill in the trophic pyramid of the kelp forest. That's cool. When do you think that project is going to have results?
Hopefully at the end of this month, we're going to get
the
results back. Yeah.
That'd be really interesting to follow up.
That's too bad, because I wanted to present it in here, but the laboratory have some issues, like always.
Right.
So we didn't get it on time.
Well, I want to turn to our audience and just make sure to say that, if you guys have any questions, please type them into the chat. We'll ask them. We have a few more minutes for some Q&A. If any of you are interested in what Emiliano was talking about, please type some questions in. I have some questions as well. As we're going through, you have, I read your bio. You have a very interesting career path, and it seems like you've always wanted to do this from a young age, right? So could you fill in the gaps a little bit, kind of share your journey of how you ended up exactly where you are today, and maybe a piece of advice to someone that wants to follow in your footsteps, right? But maybe they don't have the luxury of going to the oceans every day and being inspired. But what's some advice you could give a budding marine scientist to get started and follow in your footsteps?
Well, my main advice will be that be very persistent. Just follow what you like. I love my work every day. It's easier to live like that because you love what you do. I love the sea since I was a kid. I'm from a coastal area in southern Mexico. So I was at the sea all the time. When I was growing up in high school, I was in a school that have some marine specialization. So all the days I was going to the sea. So after I finishing my get my bachelor degree, I found that the place where I live, I couldn't work with sharks. There were not many sharks around. So because of that, there were many people working with sharks in there. So I went to the place where we got most of the sharks, that it's Mexican Pacific. So I get to the place where I'm still doing some postdoctoral in here. So I started working with also my favorite species, that is blue shark. You can see it on the background.
The blue shark's your favorite, huh? Nice.
And I started working with fishers, start to seeing what they were caught, start to understanding the effect of these catches for these species. The thing is that I love sharks and I want sharks to be there for eternity. But I know that at the place where I live, these are really important species for food and for jobs. So we have to live with that two contrary things. So that's my main focus. How can I help sharks to still be here while we are helping local communities to still cutting them? I will be happy if they switch to target other species, but I know that's not possible in the world we live in. So that's my main goal for life.
That's that standard phrase of, if you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life, or something, right?
Exactly.
It sounds like that could be you, right? We can tell you're passionate about what you're studying, and that it's something that you're winning, and that idea of persistence is a good one, right? So if you are a budding, like I said, marine scientist, you want to study this, go down this route, stay with it, stick with it, follow what you love, and you never know, maybe one day you'll be doing research on sharks and kelp forests like Emiliano. Watching hours and hours of underwater videos. We had a question from the audience asking about restoration efforts. Are there any restoration efforts going on anywhere to restore kelp forests, similar to like coral restoration that happens here on the East Coast? What's happening to bring these ecosystems back?
Yeah, there are a lot of colleagues that are working on restoration in the place where I'm working on, but other places south that are the most vulnerable areas in the mid of the Baja California Peninsula. There are a lot of projects just restoring, putting their new canopies to kelp forests to grow up. It seems like they are getting really good results, but you're always at the expectation of a new warming event that comes and changes everything. But yeah, and they are working with fishing communities that target a lot of abalone and lobster, because they are also concerned about the loss of coverage. So it's a pretty good merging to see them working together to get restored these amazing habitats.
I know I've read and I've heard about sea urchins being a big problem with kelp. You'd have these, the purple sea urchins will come in and just decimate. They call them urchin barons, right? Where they just eat all the coral, or eat all the kelp. I'm sorry. And I noticed in one of your images you showed fishers that are going out and catching sea urchins. Is that something that's helpful, and is that something that's useful to control sea urchin populations? Because there are no sea otters anymore, or there's a limited number of them that would naturally predate the sea urchins. So can humans step into that niche and help with that?
It's hard to say, but it's one of the hypotheses, because what we've seen in previous studies is that the amount of sea urchins in this part of the kelp distribution is smaller than in Central California, for example, where they have a lot of sea urchins in there. They have also better conserved kelps. But in this part of Baja, there are not many kelp coverage, but there are not many sea urchins either. So maybe that's because fishers are cutting them and they're like controlling.
That's interesting. Well, we kind of, you talked about how your project has kind of changed and expanded with the stable isotope project that's happening. But, if you were to take the next step with this project, because you never know who's listening and who's chiming in later on. But if you were written that blank check and for more funding, how would you expand? What would you do to learn more? You talk a lot about the gaps in the research that we need, and especially in Mexico for shark populations. How would you expand to start to fill more of those gaps?
Well, what I would love to do is just expand this to other kelp forest areas in Mexico to compare how they are compared to the San Quintin Bay area. But also the main issue is that we can always be sometime in there. We cannot be all the times. So we need to find these techniques that allow us to follow these animals, even if we're not there. So what we would like to do is just doing some acoustic tying with these poorly known species of rays to see how, if they are moving between sandy and rocky areas near the bay to the kelp forest, because we are seeing them in both habitats. So that means that they should be moving, but we need to prove how they are moving to understand which of these habitats are the more critical for protection. Cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. do more of what you're doing in other places, right? So you can compare. Just one last question for you before we wrap up for the evening, and it's just a very general question about how can someone from the general public, how can we get involved? How can we learn more for kelp forests, conservation of kelp forests? How can we get involved in what you're doing and other places that like similar research is happening?
Well, you saw that kelp forests are everywhere. So you will have one kelp forest close to where you live, mostly sure. So you can involve with scientists, but not only scientists. There are a lot of people that are doing some conservation in these areas. Social media is a powerful tool. So there are a lot of citizen science projects. We are starting one soon. So just be in touch with people working there, just get close to people working there. And I guess that's most all. It depends
offer to help,
on the
right?
interest of people. Yeah, offer help. We always need help.
Nice. Well, thank you very, very much for sharing your amazing project. I can't wait to learn more about it once you finish the stable isotope piece and all the amazing research I'm sure you're to do you'll accomplish in the future. Thank you again for joining us this evening.
Thank you again for the opportunity to present this to all this amazing public that are here, and I know that a lot of other people will see it after it's done.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. And thank you again to the Save Our Seas Foundation for making tonight possible and the whole series possible, actually. This is a string of distinguished speaker series going back all the way to earlier this year, into April. We have 2 more for this year. We have our next will be on November 2nd from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be talking to another West Coaster, all about 7-gill sharks in San Francisco Bay. Megan Holst, PhD candidate from the Conservation Ecology at the University of California, Davis. So please join us then and learn all you can about 7-gill sharks in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we'd love to see you then. Thank you again, Emiliano, for joining us. Thanks again to Save Our Seas Foundation, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.